people, we the people would like you to know that wherever you go, we're right by your side.
Thank you so much for tuning back in to We the People. My name is Derek Butler. Today I sit down with Linda Lutton, an amazing reporter at WBEZ here in Chicago, Illinois. She recently did a report called The View from Room 205 that examines how poverty and urban education collides in schools here in Chicago. Anyone who lives in Chicago knows that CPS is an interesting system, to say the least. And in her work, she has examined and asked and answered many questions that a lot of people have about what takes place here in the city of Chicago in reference to public education. I sat down with her after work one day and was able to get her to answer some of my questions. Let's listen.
Okay, I am Linda Lutton. I'm an education reporter at WBEZ, Public Radio in Chicago. I think the schools beat is tons of fun to cover. Really never get tired. You know, I get to cover politics, corruption, but I also get to cover, you know, how little kids learn math. And I get to cover debates over race and religion. And I think it's a beat that lots of people can identify with. Everybody's been to school. And so I'm always writing about something that people have a deep connection to in one way or another, and some strong ideas or feelings about. And also the stakes of what I'm covering is so obviously high. I basically became a journalist sort of by accident. I had a friend, I was in college, University of Wisconsin, Madison, was in college, and I had a friend who was an editor at one of the two student daily papers there. And she was all flustered because she didn't have any reporters in town. It was summer and she still had, everybody was off at internships. And she said, well, would you mind writing a story for me? And I said, well, what does that even entail? And she said, well, you know, you could just go to this meeting. You know, there's talk, the university wants to cut the Women's Transit Authority. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. I'll go to that. I paid $7. And, you know, from there, actually, I loved it. I was studying urban studies and English, and, you know, I found it was a way for me to really combine those two interests.
Her piece, The View from Room 205, has been the talk of the town in Chicago for over a month now. I wanted to hear from her what her inspiration and purpose for this piece was, and finally, what some of the response has been to it.
So The View from Room 205 is basically the story of a fourth grade class in North Lawndale, one of this country's poorest neighborhoods. And it looks at the question of poverty and how it impacts student outcomes, how it impacts education, really, and in this case, concentrated poverty. And I basically show you a portrait of the fourth grade during this school year. I'm really honored when teachers or students tell me that they feel like my story from Room 205 feels real. Most listeners, readers, Americans have a lot of ideas about poverty and about schools, about those two things. And what I was trying to do is take you deep enough into a place, and I was also trying to know that place myself well enough and deep enough to be able to show you something new, and to get to what I hope was a deeper level of truth. Alex Kotlowitz, one of my hero journalists, has written about poverty for 20, 30 years. He talks about the bigness of the little idea, I think he says, the bigness of the small idea, this notion that, you know, we can get to very, very big topics like poverty through little stories. And that's what I tried to do in The View from Room 205. So the response has been really overwhelming. WBEZ produced this piece and it aired here in Chicago on Martin Luther King Day. But it's also been airing across the country in different radio stations, different public radio stations. So actually, I got a ton of emails when this aired, and I can tell when it airs somewhere else because I get a flurry of emails from that other place. I guess, first of all, I'm moved by the fact that so many people have been touched and are moved enough to write. And almost everyone talks about how they, feel a connection to the teachers or the kids that I'm documenting in room 205. But I would say by far the most common question I've gotten, which is a question I'm not sure as a journalist I'm completely prepared to answer. The most common question I've gotten is, what can I do? What can I do as one person? And you mentioned the forum that WBEZ sponsored at the Cultural Center. That was really a community discussion. I urge people to listen to that discussion on the website, because actually we allowed a lot of time during the discussion to deal with that question, and people had really different responses and different ideas. But I think one of the things that I was challenging in this piece is an idea that sort of underlies our school policy, and it really is at the heart of American identity. It's this idea that no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, if you work hard enough, you can make it. You can be anything. That's what we tell all kids. It's really the heart of our identity as a nation. And our schools have been meant to, that's been the forum where people do that, right? That's the place where you work hard and get ahead. And I hope this piece sort of challenges some of the thinking behind that ideal, and really looks hard at how true that is. That's my hope for the sort of outcome of the piece. And I also hope, the piece poses the question fundamentally of whether, how much schools can do, sort of how far schools can take us on that path to moving people out of poverty. And it asks the question, what if we're wrong? What if we're wrong in our belief that schools can overcome poverty? There are really deep implications for children if we're wrong. There are deep implications for the conditions in which kids live, generation after generation of kids. And so I hope that it's a piece that encourages people to think deeply about those kind of issues and talk about what more could be done.
We all know that there are so many historical layers that make up for some of the issues that we currently see in public education, specifically poverty in urban neighborhoods. So I asked her to talk about the teacher that she highlighted in the piece, Ms. Hathorn, and how this history played a role in the story that she told.
Ms. Hathorn, the principal teacher in the school, she's a fourth grade teacher that I feature. She talks about her background as a teacher. Her first experience was not in a school at all. It was in the first floor of the Robert Taylor homes. That was actually sort of an outpost of Mary C. Terrell School. She told me when she was a student teacher, she was going to get her first assignment. She said, I figured, I would be put in what she called a normal black school. That's the way she said it to me. What she's talking about is a segregated school. This is the late 1960s. That's the sort of school she figured she would go to. She told me, they're not going to send me to Skokie. And she laughs and laughs. And I wish I could have got that piece in. That's something that stayed on the cutting room floor. She understood, I'm an African-American woman, an African-American teacher. I'm going to be sent to teach in an African-American school. She gets assigned to the Robert Taylor homes, not a school. And while Ms. Hathorn doesn't say this, I know from reading the history that this is so. The reason we're holding school on the first floor of the Robert Taylor homes was because Chicago Public Schools at the time would not assign African-American students to predominantly white schools, even though those predominantly white schools had space in them. There were seats, they were under-enrolled. And so you had African American kids being sent to overcrowded schools, to schools that weren't actually schools, they were running 2 and even 3 shifts of school to accommodate overcrowded conditions. And that all traces back to our history of our legacy of discrimination and segregation.
Wow. That's all I can say after that interview. Wasn't that so insightful? There was so much more to this interview that I wish I could have included in this episode, but don't fret. We have a part 2 coming next week, a quick special edition because some of the things that she talked about were so great. But thank you guys for tuning in. Follow us on social media, on Facebook and Twitter at Be Hopeful People, and our new website, www.behopefulpeople.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope that you tune in next week for our special part 2 edition. And remember, be hopeful, people. Peace.